Welcome to the second live chat in our series about the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships Program, also known as STPF. My name is Murab Sarwar. I am the recruitment director for the fellowship. You all have most likely heard from me in my role, but I serve as a resource for you to successfully navigate the application process and understand all things STPF. Also have the privilege of being your moderator for today's chat. These chats, again, are an opportunity for you to ask STPF fellows your questions. And we hope that through these chats, you'll see how the fellowship can impact policy and have a transformative experience. On to a few housekeeping items. So our application has still not opened. It will open later this year to accommodate preparations for a new pilot program being introduced this application cycle. This initiative will broaden the scope of opportunities that are available, enhance policy fellowship experiences. Really appreciate the patience from our applicant pool as we figure this out and try to get the application open. Stay in touch. We'll work with you on this. We really want to make sure people apply. We'll open this soon. And with that, more information will come. This is different than past years, but again, appreciate the patience and again, excited to have a new opportunity behind it. For those still learning about us, a quick overview of STPF. These fellowships are an opportunity for doctoral level scientists and engineers to spend a year contributing their expertise to federal policy. For 2025, applicants can still apply to our program areas, the executive, legislative, and judicial. From those three program areas, you can apply to two. They are a paid 1-year full-time commitment in Washington, D.C. So for a sense of timing, someone who applies in the 2025 application cycle will be considered for a position in the class that runs from September 2026 to August 2027. Applicants must be U.S. citizens and hold a doctoral degree in the sciences, social sciences, or engineering, and cannot be a full-time federal or AAAS employee. Those of you with a master's in engineering plus 3 years of professional engineering experience are also eligible to apply. Again, all of you here, the neat part about STPF is we recruit from all different scientific backgrounds. And so the diversity of the diversity of discipline is really important. And so the partners and offices that we have are looking for a range of fellows with backgrounds and skills. And so, excited to have people who represent so many different scientific backgrounds to participate in this program and be on the chat today. Again, to put today's session in context, we are hosting one chat each month during the summer. We're glad that you're here today and invite you to join us for the remaining 3 sessions. Each of the sessions have a unique aspect of the fellowship experience, and you'll get to hear from different STPF fellows at each. Today, we have STPF fellows who leverage the experience of the fellowship into positions that are outside of the federal government. So again, the fellowships are a 1-year experience, and you can take that experience elsewhere, or you can still stay in the policy space or work in the feds. But really wanted to highlight some folks who are now outside the federal government space. So yeah, on to the purpose of today's session. It's the chat with fellows, right? And so there's the question box. This chat operates with based off the questions that you ask. So ask questions, and to do that, click the question box in the menu and type your question in. If you like to indicate the person or people to whom your question is directed to, you're more than welcome to. We'll get to as many questions as we can today. If we don't, you're always welcome to reach out to the fellowships inbox as well. Okay, our panelists. And I'm really happy to introduce you to all of them joining us today. So Mackenzie Blue. After completing her bachelor's in science and genetics from the University of Kansas, Mackenzie joined the laboratory of Dr. Kim Nichols at St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital to conduct her doctoral dissertation work, which sought to understand the underlying mechanisms of pediatric cancer predisposition. Once she successfully obtained her PhD in biomedical science, Mackenzie moved to Washington, D.C. and joined the 2023 cohort of the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships. At the end of her fellowship, she returned to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital as a government affairs policy analyst, focusing on identifying and strengthening partnerships with the federal government to enable data-driven decision-making that allows for innovative and effective treatments for catastrophic pediatric diseases. Welcome, Mackenzie. Dr. Ryan Bixenman is a chemical ecologist and expert in science policy and the professional development programs. He is currently focused on the intersection of land management policy, biodiversity conservation, and nature-based solutions. Most recently, Ryan was the chief of operations for Limelight Rainforest, where he helped lead a team of scientists and engineers with the $5 million X Prize Rainforest Grand Prize by developing innovative methods to measure biodiversity. Prior to joining Limelight Rainforest, Ryan was a senior science officer at the California Council of Science and Technology, CCST, where he connected subject matter experts with state decision makers to create science-informed policies that better serve Californians. Ryan was in the fellowship between 2013 and 2015 at the National Science Foundation Division of Graduate Education. As a fellow, he was part of the interagency task force to modernize graduate education and carry out President Obama's strategic plan for STEM education. After the fellowship, he was the director of PhD career services at Michigan State University, where he developed and implemented a multifaceted approach to raising career awareness, preparedness among doctoral students and postdoctoral scholars. Similarly, as a policy analysis and program manager with Professional Development Hub, Ryan helped build the organization from an innovative idea to a funded and growing organization that curates graduate professional development resources. Thank you, Ryan. And Dr. Elizabeth Stolberg has a passion for food, not just cooking and eating, but for learning about agriculture, food systems, and the science that makes it all possible. As a government relations professional, Elizabeth advises clients in the areas of food, agricultural, and life sciences. Elizabeth received a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Congressional Fellowship from the American Society for Microbiology, bringing her from the bench to Capitol Hill. After her year working in the House of Representatives, she received fellowships to work in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy and the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Office of the Chief Scientist. Elizabeth holds an AB with honors in biology and German studies from Brown University and a PhD in molecular, cellular, and developmental biology from Yale University. Elizabeth uses her deep subject matter expertise and broad experience working with the federal landscape to advocate for science, leverage federal programs, and enhance her clients' scientific and technological endeavors. She is thrilled that her career lets her dive deeply into issues dealing with the food system, from plant biodiversity to nutritional inequities. So very, very, very impressive panel joining us here today. So thank you all for being here. Before going to questions from the audience, I'd love to start if you could introduce yourself, your fellowship placement, and how the fellowship has influenced the next part of your career. So Kenzie, would you mind starting us off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Mackenzie. I did my fellowship at the NIH. I was in the office of the director, where I worked on a team that was responsible for coordinating NIH-wide strategic planning and congressional reporting, primarily responsible for like annual regular congressional reporting from the agency. Um, and I think that my fellowship prepared me really well for my next role. So as a government affairs analyst at St. Jude, my role is to kind of coordinate between St. Jude leadership and the different government stakeholders, be that both Congress as well as the federal agencies. So having a good understanding of how the agencies operate and the way that they use information that we give them has really helped the way that I coordinate with them now, being on the side of being a funded institution. So yeah, I think it prepared me really well, and I was really well positioned stepping into the role, though I still had quite a bit to learn, which I'm happy to talk about as we go through this conversation.
I can go next since I guess I was next in order. Hey everyone, I'm Ryan. So my AAAS placement was at the National Science Foundation in the Division of Graduate Education, DGE. DGE runs things like the GRFP Fellowship, IGERT, GK12, newer versions of those things called NRT, etc. And so we were running programs that supported grad students through their various preparation for various career pathways. Some of the cool things I got to do while I was a fellow was work on an interagency task force to modernize graduate education. And so we got to develop new programs, one of which was GRIP, which was an internship program where we found money to place graduate students with GRFP fellowships in the federal government and kind of explore pathways outside of normal academic careers. That has since gone on to be a bigger program called Intern now, where it's anyone with any grad student with NSF funding can now like explore internships outside of academia using Intern. So that's the kind of stuff I got to do while I was a fellow. My next big job after being a fellow was running a career service office at Michigan State University. So I was the director for that program, and you can kind of see a link there, but to be specific, networks, the network of people I got to build while I was within the government was huge, both in the government and outside of the government. And bringing that network to Michigan State was important. It was a network of experts or strategic thinkers or access or idea people. And so bringing that was really big. And then, of course, being in graduate education at NSF was really good for where I was at Michigan State, which was in the graduate school. We had a lot of understanding of the national strategy and direction and what the big goals were and how to align the school with national initiatives. I think those are kind of the big ones that I really brought away from the fellowship.
Yeah, I'll weigh in last. My name is Elizabeth. Thanks for so much for the introduction, Mirab. I did a congressional fellowship in an office of a representative who had a lot of power in the House at the time. She has since passed away. She was wonderful. And so I got to work on a lot of different issues, but especially issues that I really loved. And as someone with a biology background, I realized during this fellowship, and I'd always liked the idea of policy, but I didn't really know what it was until I was doing it, right? And it's so much more. It's kind of a weird collection of a lot of different things. But I had so much fun. And what I realized was with my background at the time, which was like 2013, 2014, there were two major paths that I could go down. One was a more medical path, and the other was a agricultural path. And no offense to Mackenzie, but the agricultural path seemed like a lot more fun, like a lot more fun. Because at the time, the medical path was just like Obamacare, like it was just health insurance. And I mean, it's important, but it wasn't exactly my cup of tea. I learned so much about like where, you think you going in and like, I want to work on GMOs or something like that. But like, if there's not like a path for you, and there wasn't, like that was kind of part of the agriculture path. You can't focus in on just that one thing. You get to learn about all the different pieces. And I think as you might have heard in my like rapid fire bio that Rob did, I get to work on everything from like your traditional row crop agriculture policy, commodity stuff, to antimicrobial resistance and nutrition and public health and everything that touches food, maha, like all of this stuff I get to work on.
Awesome. And I think one of the things about STPF that folks will kind of like have a misconception of is, if you do a fellowship, then you'll just be working in the federal government, or that's like kind of like your pathway to just being in the federal government space. And I think what the three of you represent is kind of like having, making just like leveraging the experience and then kind of like taking it somewhere else and doing something different, but then kind of like finding your own niche and decide not to be around Obamacare policy all the time, right? So wanted to ask kind of like, how did you, Elizabeth, you're going a little bit into it, but like, how did you really identify and pursue those opportunities that kind of like align with your interests, that were still outside of federal pathways?
So I did stay in federal government for a couple years after my fellowship. I realized, and I think this is kind of important to note, that it's really hard to find a job, like any kind of job, federal or otherwise, if you only have like, 9 months of experience. And you start your fellowship at the end of August, you start looking in like April, May, and everyone had told me, oh, congressional fellowship, that's like career gold. Not if you're only there for 9 months. So I got 2 more years of fellowships from different societies, from different places, from USDA, before I was even eligible for like a JOB job that didn't have an expiration date, that had health insurance, some of these things that I didn't really want to do the policy on, but it's actually really important. Um, and and that uh, learning curve, like once I got to that place, you see all the job descriptions and it says like 5 years minimum. You can get away with 3. It says 5, but 3 is fine. And at that point, everything opens up. So you can look for federal jobs, but you can also look for jobs that, suit you and your interests. And, by the time I had finished these 3 fellowships, I had worked in Congress, I'd worked in a White House office, and I'd worked in an agency office. And you learn all the different tools and all the different people, which is great. And then, but what I didn't know was the outside, like the stakeholder side of things. So I ended up getting a job with a nonprofit scientific society, not AAAS, but a smaller one. The Agronomy, Crop, and Soil Science Societies have a DC-based policy office, and I was like a third of their policy office for 5 years, learning all of those tools, what stakeholders do on the outside. And let me tell you, I was really scared to leave the federal government where the power is, but you go outside and the cuffs come off. You can talk to whoever you want. You can do whatever you want, say whatever you want. So it's a totally different kind of experience with a different set of tools. And to me, it was just a very easy extension of what I had already been doing, but again, with different tools.
Brian, Mackenzie, anything for you all and kind of like how you figured out the next thing?
So I'm a little earlier in my career, I think, than there's the folks in this panel, but I can just say that I think during my fellowship, I recognized pretty quickly that I wanted to eventually get to a stage where I was being able to influence kind of the big P policy. I wanted to be, the scientific expert in a space that was helping to kind of inform decision makers and helping them make the best possible decisions, really bringing that data-driven decision making to the congressional floor, to the spaces where regulatory policy is being written. And in my fellowship, I recognized that the work I was doing was really important, but it was kind of that little P policy of implementing the big P policy, where we were developing the strategic plan to utilize the money that's been advocated or allocated to the NIH. And we were doing things like that. And it was really important, and I really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot. And I think, similar to Elizabeth, I recognized I needed a couple of years experience. So my plan was to stay at the NIH for a few years. Went through all the steps to have an FTE at the NIH before I got recruited for this job, and just kind of, I felt not entirely ready to make the leap, but the opportunity was there where they were offering me a job where I got to, like she said, take the cuffs off, really use my subject matter expertise, use like my strategic thinking to influence policy in a way that felt really meaningful. And it felt a little premature for me, but an opportunity arose. So I just kind of jumped on it, and it's been a really, really great experience for me. But I think kind of identifying where you want to sit in relation to policy being formed or implemented, and how you want to either interact with it or influence it. I think that's something the fellowship allows you to figure out, and something that's really nice to be able to work towards.
I would probably echo both what Elizabeth and Mackenzie said, with maybe some slightly different words. But I think going back and looking at, or listening to what Elizabeth said about like policy is bigger than we realize. Like, it's this like science policy space sounds like a nice tight like thing. Science, it's got to be organized, but it's like this real big amorphous bleh thing. So you can do it from inside the government, you can do it from outside of the government, I think is one thing that I can kind of hear in this conversation already, and I totally agree with that. And I think that's, I got into I was interested in the fellowship in science policy because I wanted to use science and evidence to like make the world better, right? And you do that through policy, but you can do that through like sitting outside with organizations like where I was at CCST, where we bring experts into the room, right? And so it was a nonprofit, but the whole goal was bringing in the like experts to help make a better informed policy. But you can also do it by like implementing on the ground stuff. I went from working in a graduate education office at NSF, working at a graduate school, was more boots on the ground to say, how do I work with inside that policy space that we created at the national level, and like make an actual effective change for people locally at one institution. And so I think, kind of rambling here, but I think the big thing is like policy is big, and you can affect it inside and outside the government, which I think you've heard in other stories already here. That the fellowship itself may not be enough to get you that long-term job forever in the government, but it gives you a lot of like firsthand experience to understand how big and dynamic or diverse that policy space could be. And therefore, it kind of gives you an example of maybe the niche you want to carve out later, or direction you want to go, and the networks of people to talk to do it, and the skills to explore more. Not that the fellowship is the end, but it's the like start to opening up those various pathways into a really big space.
There's a question from the audience asking kind of what level of science policy experience is recommended to be competitive for the fellowship. I know how I would answer this. Is like a question I get a lot on the road. But for you all, if you maybe want to share like kind of like where you were at science policy wise, and like science policy experience wise, and then what made you so want to apply to this.
I can say that I was pretty fresh out of grad school. So I applied right after my defense. I stuck around my PhD lab as a postdoc for like 9 months while I was going through the application process. Was able to do revisions on my dissertation to get it out to publication, and then I transitioned over to AAAS. So I was, still very early in my career. And I also did most of my PhD during COVID, so things were a little different for me. But I will say, like, I think I took every opportunity possible to talk about science with non-scientists, and I think that was really helpful and something I talked about a lot during my interview process. Things like writing blogs, giving campus tours, meeting with high school groups, stuff like that. I did things like that a lot. Getting involved in leadership activities, like I was the president of our grad student association and led some committees that organized a grad school symposium and did some of that kind of stuff. So I think what's really important to remember is that because policy is so big and broad, that really direct policy experience could be a lot of things. It's communication skills, it's organizational skills, it's leadership skills. All of those things are preparing you for policy. So I think creatively about what you've done outside of the wet bench, and a lot of them probably are preparing you pretty well for this.
Oh, sorry, Ryan, please go ahead.
Go
Okay,
ahead.
I'll chime in and say, I had an advantage because I knew in like my second year of grad school that I wanted to do something else. So a AAAS staff member had come to my university and given an information session, and I was like, oh, this is everything I want to do. So I had like the rest of my PhD process to do a lot of the stuff that Mackenzie was talking about. Like I joined slash created a group of like science diplomats to, communicate science. Like that's stuff I wanted to do anyway, but this kind of gave me a like was an eyes on the prize kind of thing, right? I was trying to do anything that I could to make myself a better candidate for this. So yeah, so I had a bit of that, but it was also really fun.
I applied for AAAS Science Technology Policy Fellowship after as a postdoc. This is my first postdoc. And I had not really been aiming for it. I had heard about it a little bit, and when I was a postdoc, I was like, man, I want to do something different with science and society. Like, I knew I didn't want to do academic career path. I want to have some other impact. And so that's when I started exploring it. And I say all that to say I did not start off with eyes on the prize. So it is possible for you if you've not been thinking about it forever. But it doesn't hurt to start early if you're still thinking about it early. But I would echo again what I've already heard here. I don't think my understanding was you don't have to be an expert in policy or have any policy experience, but really showing your capacity beyond the bench is really important, whether that's a leader or a communicator or an organizer of people or a self-starter, and really playing those parts of yourself and your professional self up in your application is really important. And I would really encourage anyone preparing to apply to reach out and talk to former fellows and ask for their advice, maybe even ask for them to read over a statement if you wanted to, if you felt comfortable sharing that. But talking to people ahead of time is very important, and look at the guidelines online. AAAS puts out those categories and how they judge them and how they weight the applications, and really focus on those. And when they say leadership's an important part, talk about leadership and not so much about the bench science you did or whatever your science is. That's important, but it's not the only thing.
Yeah, I I think that's like one of the things, like when someone hears about us the first time, they'll kind of like not really connect the dots, but then kind of understand like this fellowship opens up that pathway for you, right? If you did want to do the policy space, but even if you didn't, right? Kind of like taking it back and then using it in different aspects of your career, even if you go back to academia or something like that. Um, Kind of like leading into what you were talking about, Ryan, about skills from the bench and writing grants. The question is, what skills from working in the bench or writing grants and other academic-based skills do you feel best prepared you for roles in policy? And then, furthermore, what are some skills did you pick up during the fellowship that you've had that could prepare you for roles outside of government?
I can start this time. All right, remind me again, what what skills from like PhD postdoc prepared me for the fellowship and what new skills did I pick up kind of to help me afterwards, right? And I'm actually interested to hear what other folks say too, but I would say things that are probably transferable from working as a grad student and maybe a postdoc in, a STEM field would be critical thinking. I think we are surrounded in our scientific and engineering worlds by a lot of smart critical thinkers, and we forget most people in the world don't think that way. And so bringing that critical thinking skill set to these policy placements is really valuable. I think I hear that from other fellows, and my experience too is like your opinion is really valuable, not because you're an expert in that discipline of science you might be talking about, but you're really good at understanding a topic, unpacking it, digging deeper if you need to. You can organize and critically think really well. And I think ways that's displayed is through how you communicate those thoughts, whether it's out loud or in writing. And so talking about playing up those communication skills are really important, I think, too. I think there's a lot of others too. As a grad student, as a postdoc, you also are kind of like a leader in a way, like you're leading your own project and project management, and even if you don't realize it, and talking about that organization and management skill is pretty important too. There's a lot more I think that are transferable, but I won't go on forever. Oh, probably this is true for others. One last thought there is I worked at NSF, and you kind of like NSF's mostly PhD people, and so you kind of had to have the street cred to like be able to sit at the table and talk to people, which is like unfortunate in some ways because there's a lot of great, talented, smart people that don't have a PhD, but that was kind of the foot in the door to work that. And I'd imagine I'm speculating, but places like NIH or EPA in some instances, depending on what offices you're in, like DOE or something, it might be like that as well. But it really depends on the agency you're at, and I think that's an important side note for later. Is every agency is different culture. But what skills I learned and took forward from the fellowship, again, a lot. I think broadly speaking, I did not going into the fellowship understand what it meant to have like weekly professional development opportunities. So the fellowship has, in addition to doing work at an office, you don't have to go to all of them, but you go to a lot of professional development opportunities, and that could be anything from communication to how do you like where place settings are at formal dining settings and like a state dinner to like doing individual development plans to all sorts of stuff, right? And just being, I think what I took away from that was not necessarily one individual professional development element, but just being very structured and focused on your own professional development was really, really important. And thinking about how, like, what are the skills or networks or other things you may need to do the job I'm doing right now really well. And that should be part of your job, is that professional development, but also down the road into the future, what's the next thing you should be working on, the next skill, the next group, the next contact, or whatever it might be. And I'd say networks, people are so important for doing your job well that you're already in and finding that next job as well.
Okay. Oh,
I get chicken.
it's hard. You go ahead.
So I guess to add, I second everything Ryan said. There's a lot of really great tidbits in there. And I think, and I think what's been really interesting in this role now, where my job is to kind of monitor the legislation that's coming out, the policies that are coming out of the agencies, and look for how it might impact an organization like St. Jude that does research and provides healthcare, and think about how we can either make sure that we're following legislation correctly as an institution, or engaging with it and influencing it where it's necessary. In order to be in this position, I think it's really important that I've experienced what it's like to be the scientist at the bench. A lot of people in my role haven't had that experience, which I find really interesting, because I think it's hard to know what resources are critical for a scientist. It's important to know what career progression looks like for a scientist. It's important to know what the struggle of a new PI is, what the, how funding impacts your day to day as a scientist. So I think just having that perspective has been so critical. And I found myself in a lot of rooms where I find I'm bringing a perspective that is really unique because of that. But then my time at the NIH, I've kind of gotten to see the other side where I've seen what's it like to make funding decisions, what's it like to receive responses to a request for information and use that information in a smart way, what it's like to actually conduct these review panels that are looking at grants and all of those types of things, and how their policies actually impact the way we do science. So I think getting to see both sides of that now, when I'm hearing complaints from one side, hearing concerns from another, seeing things coming out from the agency, I'm able to kind of bring the right information and the right people into the right rooms to help us understand each other better and move forward in a smart way. I think, it was really helpful through STPF that I got some exposures to how the legislative process works, but having not ever spent any time on the Hill, that's kind of where my deficit and where my learning curve still is I interact with Congress on a weekly basis now, and I'm learning a lot through it, but I definitely learning kind of a congressional cycle and what that looks like and how to interact with staffers and what kind of information they need from me to do their job well has been a learning curve. But I've been able to bring a lot of kind of the professional development that AAAS gave me on just the PD side into understanding that faster than I would have without it. And then I feel like I have the expertise on the agency side to have jumped right into that type of, advocacy and influencing work. So I think, it's really given me the critical pieces of knowledge to even take advantage of this opportunity and learn what there is to learn next.
Echo all of the stuff about professional development for AAAS. The congressional fellows get a special extra session at the Library of Congress on that congressional legislative cycle and how it works. So helpful. And I mean, in my job now, it's our bread and butter. Like our entire office calendar revolves around that cycle, and so do many advocacy organizations. That being said, I'd like to point out that when I was a student, this is one of the things I didn't mention before. I organized a trip to DC for a lot of students and postdocs, and I connected with alums who were working in policy, and I'm like, hey, can you host us? And they're like, sure. And so we went down there and we came back and we had a debrief with a bunch of folks who weren't able to go. And we just had a pizza party and talked it through. And there was this one woman, oh my God, she was such a downer. She was she came with us, she was interested, but every single thing, she was like, we even had a session at AAAS with AAAS, staff talking to us, taking time out of their day to talk to us about policy, just because we asked nicely, you know what I mean? And she was giving them a hard time, like, why haven't you done more for climate change or something like that? And I was like, what are you talking about? It was embarrassing. And we'd come back and she's like, things don't move fast enough in government. And I remember thinking, I am in a PhD program where it is going to take me 7 years. It took me 7 years to make one tiny improvement in the body of knowledge that means next to nothing, right? And in Congress, it's the same way. If you're a senator, you have a 6-year term, and you produce one piece of legislation and it actually passes, that's a huge win. You can go back and campaign on that till the end of days. And that's, I mean, a president has 4 years to do basically one signature thing, right? Like Obamacare or big, beautiful tax breaks or whatever it is you like. And that's it. That's it. That's your shot at it. And sometimes it doesn't happen. And then you have to try again next time. And what I learned in working in Congress and even working, elsewhere in government is this patience is so important, because oh my gosh, it's nonstop and you're going and you're doing and everything seems really exciting and nonstop, because it is. But at the same time, you could work 10 years on something and then finally make it happen. Or I just worked on a program for the last 4 years that got into the one good thing that got into that really big, beautiful bill that I'm really proud of. But it took us 3.5, 4 years of work to get it in there. And you can't, that patience, I mean, I want to say it's something I learned in policy, but it's probably something I also brought with me from a PhD.
I want to just build on that, if I may. I totally agree with everything you said, Elizabeth. day to day, you're busy, you're working, and like there's an incremental forward progress, and like after so many years or whatever it might be, you have the big goal. And I totally agree with that. But I've worked in the government, I worked in the executive branch, and I've worked in higher ed administration afterwards. And I will say, higher ed administration is way slower than government, despite all the griping that you hear about how slow government is, and it is, right? But it's like a continuous, steady process. Academia is no grounds to call them slow. So I just want to put that out there. It's like pot kettle.
I don't want to touch on the theme that you kind of brought up, Elizabeth, of just kind of like really navigating challenging environments, right? And just kind of like understanding how you kind of like adjust and shift and to try to like meet the moment where it is. All the chat has a lot of questions about the current environment, how that's making an impact on the fellowship. I know organizationally speaking, like I can speak to you, we're going to have less placements in the next year, and that's part of what we're working through. We're trying to make sure we have enough for people to still fill these positions, but at the same time, they're entering a different environment that we're learning about every day, right? A few questions asking like how you would approach this, but then at the same time, I do wonder if maybe any of you can kind of speak to being in an environment where you're being challenged, where the ideal outcome is not the first thing, but still kind of like making that minimal progress or everyday progress, and just kind of like navigating, the next few months or the next few years, and kind of like how you all having now been through the fellowship, maybe seeing current fellows go through it, seeing what future fellows might go through. Um, threw a lot at you, but however you want to internalize that, feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to start. I have talked to a lot of people, like especially in the federal government, like, how are you doing? And I feel like the best answer I've gotten was from one person I talked to who said, I feel like I'm swimming upstream. And I think that's like, I feel that way too. This is a environment that's not friendly to science, that's not friendly to academia. It's and they're really like, there are a few things you can do with this, and it's really up to you and your personality of whether you want to deal with this or not, right? Like there's some people who, and I work with them, who just they want to do great things. They want to do big great things. This is not the environment to do big great things. And if that is what like gets you up in the morning, this might not be the time, honestly. There are other people that kind of, they prefer the defense, like bring it. I I'm gonna protect what's mine. You bring that, I'm gonna bring something else, and like figuring out strategies to defend. And that is the environment for this, right? So there's those pieces. And then there's kind of a third way, which is, and I wish I could be more like this person. Like I wake up trying to be this person, like trying to find that silver lining, trying to, like, from the agriculture standpoint, right? Trying to look at this MAHA movement, this Make America Healthy Again movement, which, it's so problematic in so many ways. And yet, are there opportunities to actually improve the food system here? Like, people are actually talking about it. Can we capitalize on that? Where are those opportunities? Are they an illusion? Is it all talk? Or is there something there? Like, this is what keeps me going. So, identifying what kind of a person you are in this kind of environment will help dictate where you want to be in your career if you're going into this at this point. Because if you're going into a congressional fellowship and you're going into, a Democrat office, for example, you're going to be playing that defense. You're going to learn how to play defense, which is what I did. I was in the House of Representatives when when the Republicans were in control, and you learn how to do things when you have no power. And it's there are things you can do, but it's not for everybody.
Well, I agree with that. And like knowing, kind of having a little self-reflection, knowing like what kind of person you are and like what role you might play, I think be helpful. And I agree with that, but I would also share maybe a little different point of view on the fellowship, or a different aspect of it rather. And be curious to hear if Mackenzie, Elizabeth, you think this way too or not, because you were in different placements altogether. But at NSF, and the sense I got was that at other fellowships, or sorry, other placements, at least some of them, you're not an employee, you're a fellow. Some placements you're kind of like an employee, I think. But you're a fellow, and therefore you're not allowed to do work that's done by an employee because there are unions that protect those employees' jobs, and you can't take someone's job away. And you're usually funded through some sort of granting stream or something. And so I say all that to say you do something outside of the normal role that the office employees do, or those offices do. And so fellows at NSF often are tasked to do something new and creative, right? And you're not the same line item budget items as like an employee. And so you're looked at differently from various offices. And in this case, in this environment, I'm speculating here, you might be able to get away with some things that an employee might not be able to. So NSF grants money. My understanding is it grants money to AAAS to then do the fellowship, right? And so we're a granting item as a fellow, or I was, right? And so that money is managed differently than budgets to pay employees. And so there's difference in how you might be, how on what the funding, what that means for funding for you as a fellow, but also because you're a fellow NSF, you were like again not supposed to do the day-to-day rote tasks that like the science assistants and staff were doing, or even the program officers were doing. You had to do something new. And so you got to step outside of a typical role in the government and potentially have your own lane and do new creative things, or not be beholden to some of the same rules. You still have to follow a lot of rules. Don't get me wrong, there's still handcuffs there, but you get to step out and do other new creative things so you can bypass some restrictions that like fellow or that staff may be bound by. And so I do not know how that plays out in this environment, but I say that as a potential word of like optimism that like as a fellow, it's a little different, even in when it, 10 years ago was different anyway. And I can imagine it potentially being different in this day and age as well than a full-time employee.
Yeah, I think, what you said is really important, and that I would, in thinking about fellowship placement, I think it's really important to think about exactly what Elizabeth said, that there's some different ways to approach the landscape right now and think about how you can feel that you're making the best impact for you and also the happiest for yourself. Because I agree completely. I think right now there are roles where there's a lot of defense being played. Like I think, there's some spaces within the biomedical sciences right now where we're really trying to justify the need for certain areas of research or certain approaches to scientific study, and you're getting a lot of defense. But I think there's a lot of opportunities right now for some of those silver linings too. Like, the FDA is trying to do a lot of streamlining of clinical trial design, and they're trying to get rid of some regulatory burden when it comes to rare disease therapeutic development. And we're trying to look for ways to really capitalize on those opportunities to try to make it easier to treat rare childhood diseases. But then, and so like, I think it's just really thinking about where you want to be placed and what you want to be doing. But I think it's really important to emphasize that it's been a chaotic couple of months for scientists across the federal government, but there are still really, really amazing people holding down the fort in all of these places. And I think what's kind of keeping a lot of folks going right now is knowing that as we're starting to figure out what the new normal looks like for federal investment in science, and that it's going to be really important that scientific expertise and that institutional knowledge is still embedded within the agencies and on Capitol Hill, like within Congress, that there's still good people there that are ready to do this work. So I think, that's something to keep in mind is when things swing one way, they swing back. We find an equilibrium in the middle. We're going to figure out what the new normal looks like, and having strong scientists willing to help figure out how the government supports science moving forward is going to be really important. I think something that I found really important for myself going into being in my current role in this landscape is I think it takes a lot of energy, but I've been really energized by being a part of the conversation. So I think it's good to think about how you can kind of energize yourself in the position you're in. It's requiring a lot of patience. and the finesse of meeting people where they are. Like I do a lot of meetings with congressional staff to talk about why science is important. And some of those meetings are like, yes, science is super important. We love what you do. How can we help you? And some of those conversations are very skeptical and kind of a distrust of the biomedical enterprise, and a lot of talking about having to really meet them where they're at, talk in language that is easy to communicate in, that people can actually access, and be patient while you try to bring them along and give them really like strong, reputable information. And it's a long trust building game right now. So it requires a lot of patience if you want to fill that type of a role. I'm, still fairly new in it myself and hoping it pays off eventually, but trucking along right now.
I think on the flip side too, in talking to applicants, there's a group of people who want to apply now, or who are like more policy focused right now, and kind of want to be in these places to still kind of like leverage that work. I think something that's like unique about STPF is, we recruit from all career stages, right? So we'll have folks who are fresh off their PhD, folks who have done faculty positions. We have a question from someone who is a mid-career faculty member with a strong interest. I kind of like speak to like how, unique the fellowship composition is of different backgrounds and different disciplines and different career stages, but wanted to see if either of you, any of you kind of like wanted to speak to folks who are faculty or mid-career or just probably in different career stages who then kind of like sought out AAAS and how that impacted your fellowship.
Can you kind of restate that question? I don't know if I quite followed. Yeah, I apologize.
So for folks who are already mid-career, who might be motivated to apply for the fellowship now, I think part of what has made the fellowship unique is people can apply at any career stage. So wanted to see if that's something that you all noticed in your time in the fellowship of just being able to interact with folks in different career stages, have that network, but kind of like also kind of like reinforce that wherever you are in your career, if you have like the qualifications, you can still apply.
I'm going to say that I don't know that many people mid-career that did these fellowships. I mean, you could tell us whether that like statistically, I'm just like missing them, but I know a lot of people who started right out of PhD or close or like, short postdoc. And I know a lot of people who went later. And it seems to me that the reason we didn't see too many mid-career people is because it's it's like a dipping your toe in the water, these fellowships. There, I don't know too many people who do like launch into an academic career and then say, let me try something different, in the middle, because it's you really have to commit, because sometimes you have, at that point you have little kids probably, if that's the way your life goes, that's the way mine did. Um, and so you're really uprooting like your family, as opposed to, I knew a lot of professors who were much later in their careers. Their children were grown or at least high school, and they could afford the time to try this out. And I will say that every single one of those professors that I knew who were later in the career had every intention of going back to their home university and resuming. One of them was from the University of Maryland. He had petitioned his department for years for sabbaticals for 1 year so that he could do this. They didn't want to do it. They didn't want to do it. Finally, they let him do it. And when he came back, they were all over themselves trying to get him to like teach classes on policy and join this board. And he was like, why didn't you let me do this 20 years ago? The other person I know very well who did this, she went back to her teaching job in Minnesota as a professor, and then 2 years later got a job back in DC because she couldn't leave it behind. So, but again, I think it's just really hard if you're at that middle stage in your career where you're like on the tenure track and you don't want to take any time off from that, or you have little kids and you're uprooting your whole family to DC for what, 1-2 years tops. Like that's really hard to do. And I will say I did meet one woman from NSF who did that. She was a AAAS fellow. Oh, no way, she wasn't. No, she was just an NSF rotator. And even then it was really hard. Like she left her family back in like on Long Island and would visit them on the weekends, her little kids. And I think that's really hard. So I think that's probably why.
Hear you. I think the thing I would push back on is that like if you are mid-career and like even if you don't directly see it somewhere here, I think, and policy still interests you, I think like organizationally, I definitely like encourage you to like explore the opportunities that are there. If you can get like the year to take the time to do that, I think that's amazing. I think on our side, we want to have like as many folks as representing different things as possible to do that. And so, that's what that's the kind of like my
Yeah,
official
I didn't mean to
AAAS
like say you
STPF.
shouldn't
No,
do it.
no,
If you can
if you
swing it, like
can
I
though.
said, like that one guy, he came back and he was like, I'm already close to retirement. Like you should have done this. And he wished he had been able to do it 20 years earlier and bring all of that information and experience that he had back. Um, yeah, and I've known people, not necessarily AAAS fellows, but those who have come and worked in government for a little while and gone back to their home institution and brought this like wealth of experience and knowledge. Oh man, they're the favorite people of their like university's GR departments because they know how it all works. So yeah, no, it's a wonderful thing if you're interested. It's just I believe I probably haven't seen as many because it's hard, just because it's hard.
Yeah, I would again just echo what you said, Elizabeth. Like, without speculating on why those mid-career folks maybe are less prevalent, like I think you have a lot of good examples. But yeah, I did not see many, but often the ones I did see were looking to gain that experience and bring it back to their home institution and integrate it into some coursework they're already like teaching or building new programs or something like that. But I also did see a few, and one of them I worked with at NSF who was like kind of mid late career, but he had kind of a different family situation and he was just looking for a big change. Like he just, and the fellowship is a great stepping stone for that. I mean, I don't know about you all, but for me, I was early career. I had finished I was wrapping up one postdoc, and I was looking for a stepping stone into something else. And I think that was true for at least this one person I knew very well as a fellow. And he just, yeah, he's looking for something else, and he's gone on to like run granting programs outside of the government now. And so yeah, I think that's still a possibility for mid-career folks. But to Elizabeth's point, like I think it's different. Like the quantity of people in that category is lower. So, or at least my observation also would match yours, Elizabeth.
Yeah, but just to add, I think, I agree. I don't think there's a ton of mid-career folks. I've seen a few that have had a really great experience and are bringing it back. But I will say that overall, I think one of the largest value adds of this fellowship program is the diversity and the quality of your fellowship cohort. And I think having some different perspectives within that cohort has been really, really cool and really valuable. I've learned just as much sitting around chatting with fellows between PD events than at the PD events sometimes. Like it's really cool to hear the different perspectives and like what that brings to the different workshops you do and different affinity groups you can join. You really meet people from across all disciplines, across all career stages, and I think there's a lot of benefit to that. So I think, those folks that aren't the fresh out of grad school, fresh out of postdoc, that are further in their career do bring a really important, unique perspective to a cohort. But yeah, it's definitely not as common as being on either end of the spectrum, like near a retirement phase or earlier on.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. So we're running close to the end of the hour. One last question to close us off with. If you could just give, if you were talking to an applicant and had 30 seconds of advice to give them in applying for the next cycle, what would you give them?
Talk to a former fellow. Talk to a former fellow and get their advice. Like, yeah, both on terms of like what they did as a fellow, but also like, what they put in an application or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the best advice I got, and probably is, how I got through my first time applying. I talked to a former fellow and talked to them about what you're interested in. And if they connect you with another fellow, talk to another fellow and start engaging in that network if any way possible. Like I know personally, whenever a grad student's reached out to me, I've immediately connected them with at least one or two other people that fit their interests even better. So take advantage of the network, tap into it wherever you can. Most of us are pretty willing to even respond to a cold LinkedIn message. So reach out.
So to that point, following up, I thought about this as you were saying, Mackenzie, like, how do you do that? Google informational interview. If you don't know what that is, look up what an informational interview is. It is totally expected that you will reach out and talk to people, whether you're looking at fellowships or anything else. The tool you might use is informational interview. I will say it again, informational interview, and LinkedIn. So you can look up fellows. We usually put our experience on our LinkedIn profiles. You can look up fellows by Google searching them. You can filter down to people who maybe came out of the same program, at least the same institution as you, and you already have a foot in the door to be like, hey, I see you also went to University of blah, and you're a fellow. I'm interested. Do you have 15 minutes for a phone call? I guarantee you'll get positive results out of that.
I might also suggest, okay, this might not be the exact right place to say this, but I might also suggest looking into every other fellowship program that there are. You know, I think that the AAAS fellowship is awesome, but I had colleagues from my graduate school that went and did PMFs, which don't exist right now, but there are still fellowships that exist a lot through scientific societies. I ended up getting a scientific society fellowship after my AAAS fellowship. So those do exist. Some of them still do exist. They may not put you in the government. They may put you in their like GR office. It's also good experience. But for me, when I remember I was in my interview, and it was the American Society for Microbiology that interviewed me, not AAAS. I never interacted with them. But ASM folks interviewed me. And one of their questions was like, you know, if you don't get this fellowship, or why do you think this is the fellowship for you? And I said, you know what? I'm not 100% sure, but I applied to these 3 other fellowships because I'm really interested in policy. But here's why I think AAAS is probably the best one for me. And later, one of the interviewers, who was a former fellow herself, was like, that told me that it's not just like, oh, I need a postdoc and where am I going to go all of a sudden? Oh, AAAS has this fellowship. But it was like, oh no, this person is really interested in this. And not just, you know, a one-off interested, like she applied for a lot of these different, like not just like a postdoc and this, but like a bunch of policy things. So that can also signal that you really want this.
Well, 1000%. I always like to tell people like there are so many other ways to get engaged with science policy, and that AAAS is not. So like, Ryan, you're from CCST, like state fellowships are also great too. So any way that you can get find those different opportunities is great. So thank you all. Thank you all for being such a great panel and getting into the mud. So let's close out. Cool. Things that we'll end on. The application will open later this year. Stay in touch as we announce this update. Our team's working really hard to get that to you and also have these new opportunities ready for you to apply to. In our next chat, we'll have a few faculty members actually come on and talk about how they thought of STPF as service. And for folks who are in that mid-career, late career position, that will be a great chat for you all to kind of engage with those folks next month in August. A lot of questions we did not get to, very sorry. But please just reach out to fellowships@AAAS.org. You're welcome to connect with any of the panelists as they see fit. But if you need to reach out to our team too, we're here as well. So thank you all. Have a good one.